We unpack. We unpack. We unpack. Coming to you live. Boxing Ego unpack. Yeah. We unpack. We unpack. We unpack. Coming to you live. In the words of Marvin Gaye, hey, what's going on? What is going on? We got some breaking news, rather shocking. Undefeated fighter Southpaw Shakur Stevenson. His next opponent is not going to be William Zepeda, but it now might be Joe Cordina. We went from Zepeda to Cordina. Catches bullets with his teeth. Ninja, please. All right. I guess I'll have to talk about it. Make sure you guys follow me on social media at BOXINGEGO1 on Instagram. Help the page get to 75,000. We're building this page up. You know, I've been here, done that. And I want to talk about Shakur Stevenson. Shakur became a free agent after his last fight with Artem Haratunin, right? And in doing that and becoming a free agent, many people, they were kind of curious as far as where Shakur would go. What would be the home for Shakur Stevenson? Would he opt to stay with Top Rank? I told you guys, in my opinion, that it didn't look like he would. It didn't look like Shakur Stevenson was interested in keeping a relationship with Top Rank. He seemed like he had it. The two were kind of at odds. The two had exchanged words in social media, and ultimately, for me, I think it was pretty easy to see that Top Rank wasn't going to be his home in the future. So it left the begging question, what would Shakur Stevenson do? And we may be a few steps closer to finding that out. Now, as of recording this video, he hasn't confirmed anything at all, but you be the judge. So Shakur Stevenson, the brand new information that came out suggests that Shakur Stevenson may fight a British fighter, Joe Cordina. Here's the kicker. He's coming off of a loss, not just a L, you know, because there's different losses. Like Sean Porter lost to Keith Thurman, but it wasn't an embarrassing loss. There's different severities to L's. This guy fought earlier this year, 2024, and he lost by knockout. So he's coming directly from a knockout, and this is the guy that Eddie Hearn has suggested could be next for Shakur Stevenson. And you guys see it on the screen. Stevenson eyes boxing match against Cordina. Shakur expressed interest in fighting Joe Cordina despite Cordina's recent loss, suggesting Cordina was fighting at an inappropriate weight. And then I've also included this. So Eddie Hearn did this interview. It says exclusive. Eddie Hearn reveals Shakur Stevenson versus Joe Cordina talks. So this is not just any old rumor. We know Eddie Hearn has been public about wanting to work with Shakur Stevenson, and he could very well get his chance to work with Shakur Stevenson, but this is not the fight that most people imagine. So this is not a rumor, because you have a promoter who's telling you the two sides are in talks. If you needed more proof of this potential fight with Shakur Stevenson and Cordina, I present to you this. Somebody on Instagram, or actually this is Twitter, they said, I don't want to see it. He just got stopped by a guy that didn't get a knockout in 8 years. Oh my gosh, I love my job. So obviously other people had heard about this rumor, And this news, I actually said it's not a rumor. So let me take that back. It's not a rumor. Eddie Hearn put this out. This guy must have seen it. And he says this guy lost to a guy who hadn't had a knockout in 8 years. Shakur tries to justify fighting Cordina. Nasty work. He was weak fighting at 130 pounds. He's actually a really good fighter, just was sucking himself down to make weight, and he shouldn't have been making a weight that he shouldn't have been making. I for sure wouldn't take dude lightly, but Zepeda don't want to fight just yet. So whoever it is going to be, they going to get this work. Wow. Someone said, we not buying this BS. This issue is like T.O. versus Claggett. Shakur says, Claggett has 7 losses before T.O. and never won a world title, let alone 2. Someone says to fight a 2-time world champion. He says, if it's not the any of the top names belt holders who clearly not interested in making a fight with me, they gonna be mad. Uck it, I'ma stay sharp regardless. So Shakur Stevenson, he can enjoy staying sharp. Nobody wants to see that Mr. Williams. Nobody wants to see that bull. Let me know if you know what movie that's from. Listen, this is legit atrocious. This is an atrocious fight, y'all. I can't even hold you. I don't know what you want me to do. I'm sorry. This is a terrible fight. I mean, what? And here's the thing. The crazy thing is Shakur, he's a great fighter. He's a talented fighter, but he sounds just like Bud Crawford. You know, oh, this guy, you know how Bud will say, I have a signature win. I fought Ricky Burns. The way you view Ricky Burns is not how history reviews Ricky Burns. You can say whatever you want about Ricky Burns. He's not that ill. I don't care about belts and all that because there's so many ways to get belts. This is not Sugar Ray Robinson era, Ray Leonard era, where all the dudes that had belts were certified. We know this. There's a lot of politics. There's people who are ranked in the top 10, and if they step up to the number 1 guy, world level, they're getting cooked. But somehow they're ranked in 1 or 2 or 3 sanctioning bodies or whatever the case is. So Shakur can try to justify this fight and sell it off as something people want to see, but he's in for a rude awakening. Nobody wants to see this, right? And Shakur, he also took to social media. It says Turkey offered Zepeda bread and he said no. What the F? Zepeda pushed it back. The fight will happen in February. Somebody else says, what about fighting Ray Murataya, who's with Top Rank, and Robert Garcia? He says, tell them reach out to my team or tell Bob Arum to hit Eddie. That can happen next. That's a way easier fight than Cordina at his rightful weight, to be honest. So again, Shakur is trying to sell that this Cordina fight, coming off of a loss, moving up in weight, is somehow this fight that we need to see and better than other options like Murataya. I call cap. Why on earth would it be Cordina? And Shakur hasn't announced that he's with Eddie Hearn, but he went to the Crawford Madrimov. Turkey said he wants to work with him. So he's all but announced that he'll probably go towards Eddie Hearn in the Riad season for his next fight, kind of like Terrence Crawford did. This behavior from both Crawford and Shakur Stevenson is utterly mind-boggling. Majority of the great fights that Crawford, especially when he was at 147 and just moved up, and now Shakur are calling for, are with PBC. Why would you align yourself with someone or an entity not named PBC, yet and still be calling for big fights with Tank? Just like Crawford was calling out Keith Thurman and wanted to fight all the PBC fighters like Errol when he was with Top Rank. It looks really ridiculous. It's the oldest trick in the book. And the funny thing is people are praising this, saying, oh, Turkey saved boxing. Turkey said he wanted a doubleheader with Crawford versus Virgil Ortiz and then Shakur Stevenson on the same card versus Zepeda. And now we're talking about Shakur versus Cordina, who is moving up from 130 to 135 and coming directly off of a loss. Who on earth authorized this? Who wants to see? This is not a takeover. This is a talk over. This is exactly what DAZN did when they said they were taking over America, and then they offered up similar style fights. Nobody wants to see an American stud and skilled fighter versus an unknown British guy that has zero profile right here in the States, that no person in the States has pretty much watched unless they watched him on mistake or by accident. And then they're going to try to market this. And then furthermore, Shakur, if he does fight Cordina, this is the second opponent coming off of an L. But this time, not only is he coming off an L, he's coming off of a stoppage L in his last fight, which just happened a couple months ago. And now he's trying to sell you that this is somehow a great fight. And he's trying to sell you that he wants to fight Tank. This is not the behavior of someone who wants to fight Tank. I'm just going to keep it real. Shakur, why would you fight two fighters, Artem Harutyunyan, who was coming off a loss to Frank Martin, and also fight Cordina, possibly, who's coming off a stoppage loss, and then he needs to move up in weight? And then here's the thing, Cordina and Shakur Stevenson have went back and forth and dissed each other in the past, we'll say. And they've talked about fighting in the past, we'll say, right? That being said, now you're acting like his friend and his agent, trying to uplift him or sell the public. Oh man, he wasn't making the weight good. How do you know this? How do you know that he'll be more proper at 135 if you guys were just beefing a couple years ago? How do you know that this is his proper weight, right? You're just trying to sell the fight. Shakur sounds like a promoter. And here's the thing, I can prove it. In the comment section, answer this question. If Gervonta Davis, who is the king of the lightweights at 135, if he announced his next fight was Joe Cordina, what would you guys say? Tell me if Tank announced a Joe Cordina coming off of a loss, a stoppage loss, moving up in weight, what would you say? And that'll prove everything. Because Tank brought Hector Luis Garcia, who had beat Chris Colbert, which was a very good win for him. And then he moved up and he was undefeated and he was an Olympian and it was a precursor to Ryan Garcia. That's who Tank fought, and people still had a problem. Tank didn't fight a smaller guy plus a smaller guy coming off of a loss and then try to justify it. I do not believe Shakur Stevenson, based on these actions, truly wants to fight Tank, because one, you would align yourself probably with Tank's people. Two, there's other better names than Cordina who's done nothing in the division. Speaking of what I just said with Tank and Cordina, if this is his true weight and all that, what would happen if Tank fought Cordina? You're trying to make excuses like, oh, but he was sucking himself down in the weight. A lot of fighters do that. That don't mean they get cooked and stopped and knocked out, right? So if Cordina moved up in weight, took no tune-ups, didn't acclimate, and fought Gervonta Davis, he getting slept. No matter what, he's getting slept. But especially coming off of a loss and moving up in weight. There's no justification for this fight. You guys said that Eddie Hearn is the best promoter and Turkey was taking over boxing. This fight stinks. It stank. I don't care what nobody says. You guys let me know in the comment section what you think. But why not fight Murataya, who just beat Tevin Farmer? And then Shakur's tweeting, tell Bob to hit Eddie. Why don't you hit your promoter and then have them reach out to Top Rank. You're supposed to be the A side. Why is the onus always on somebody else? Tell Tank's team to hit me up. Tell Bob Arum to hit Eddie up. Does Shakur even care who he's fighting at this point? Because Cordina is pitiful. I don't care about, again, it sounds just like Bud. Oh, Ricky Burns. You are the Ricky Burns fight. Nobody was really tripping off it. You beat him. Terrence Crawford beat him. Great. Amazing. That's cool. But it just wasn't a big fight like that. It's not this celebrated. Now, personally, you like, oh, okay, this is my first time being a champion. So I can understand it having a sentimental, special place in your heart. But these just aren't good fights, you know? And people were like, Turkey's coming over. He's saving the game. Riad season. But I've noticed something. Turkey keeps calling for certain fights, saying he wants certain fights, and then nothing happens, right? After Boots Ennis beat David Avanesian, he FaceTimed him and he said he wants to make the Crawford fight. What happened to that? What happened to the Crawford Boots fight? Now they're talking about Boots fighting his mandatory Karen, a guy he already beat. Before the Virgil Ortiz Sergey Boachuk fight, Turkey said multiple times on camera, on DAZN camera, that he wanted to make the fight with Crawford and Virgil Ortiz if Virgil Ortiz won. Guess what? Virgil Ortiz won. And then now they're talking about, we don't know who Crawford's going to fight, and I want to see a Virgil Ortiz Boachuk rematch. Shakur, they said he was going to be on the same card as Crawford. They want to fight him on the same, like a doubleheader, and have him fight against Zepeda. Now Shakur is blaming Zepeda, saying he needs more time. I mean, ultimately, people don't care. They just want the end result. Either you're going to fight the big fights or you're not. And since Shakur has got to 135, it's looked absolutely dreadful. Absolutely dreadful with the opponent selection, Yoshino. And then the times where he had somewhat of a name, it was a bad fight to watch, like Edwin De Los Santos, which leads me to something else I want you guys to think about. Shakur took time out of his day to hate on Tank, to hate on Frank Martin when they were about to fight. Two guys he says he wants to fight. That's a fact. He's like, oh, Frank Martin's not that good, blah, blah, blah. But Frank Martin and you were slated to fight the year before, and then everyone was saying it was a good fight. But I digress. The question is, when you were doing those podcasts, hating on Tank, hating on Frank Martin, Shakur would constantly praise Edwin De Los Santos and say stuff like, oh, he's the top 3, top 4 lightweight. He's one of the best. Tell these other guys to fight him. You claim that you were injured when you fought Edwin De Los Santos. Those injuries have healed, or you had surgery, whatever. Why don't you, instead of saying tell Tank, because that's what he said tell Tank to fight Edwin De Los Santos. Why is he not fighting De Los Santos and he's fighting Frank Martin? Tank's the A side. His career has nothing to do with you. You don't dictate his career. You say he's a top 3 guy. You have the performance that everybody hated versus this guy. Why don't you fight Edwin De Los Santos for a second time and clean that up? Say, hey, my hand was bad. I felt sick. I was off. But watch what I do now that I'm fully healthy. Instead, they're trying to give you Joe Cordina, which is a horrible fight. You can't. If they were leaving Shakur Stevenson's last fight in his own hometown in Newark versus a wily and kind of game Artem Harutyunyan, can you imagine if they tried to put the Cordina fight in America? But their moves are so telegraphed and predictable, they'll probably put it in the UK, if not in Saudi Arabia. So come back to this video. It looks like Shakur will probably link up with Eddie Hearn in Riad season, and it looks like they're trying to greenlight this Joe Cordina fight. And I just think it's terrible. I think it's a terrible fight. Guy who hasn't been at the weight. Shakur's a good fighter, a guy coming off a loss, a guy with absolutely no visibility. He's not even coming. Whether he had, like, Israel Madrimov didn't have a lot of visibility here in the States, but at the very least, bare bones minimum, you can say he was an undefeated guy, and he was a champion, and he wasn't coming off a stoppage loss. And you can say, hey, against lesser guys, he looked like he could fight a bit. This Cordina fight is terrible. And you guys was sitting up here saying Riad's season was the best thing since sliced bread. I don't see the vision. I do not want to see Shakur versus Cordina. It's such a waste of time fight. And here's the thing. Shakur just fought. He satisfied his contract with Top Rank, and he just fought against Artem Harutyunyan. So it's not like he's been out the ring for a year, or he's been out the ring a year and a half or something like that, 11, 18 months, and he just has to get some activity. He just fought. So there's really no excuse. And this is part of the major problems with boxing is people have their own agendas and they're trying to make their own fights. So boxing is very fractured and dispersed amongst different people at the moment. And then some people, to try to stay competitive, they're overpaying fighters based on what that fighter truly should generate. And they're trying to reach and stretch, and the product becomes very stepped on. Shakur Stevenson versus Joe Cordina is not dope. It's been stepped on like 50 times. This is that stepped on wet. Like it is not the same. It is not pure. Nobody's asking for this fight. You mean to tell Pitbull just lost, but he didn't get knocked out? You mean to tell me Pitbull, who can probably make 35 still, that's not a better fight? You couldn't find somebody like Pitbull off a loss, El Rayo. You know, they're saying that the Riad season has all the money. How, if you're not even helping Shakur? His last two fights have garnered a lot of negative feedback. And then you're going to put him in there with somebody else who I really feel like that gives Shakur Stevenson very little to build from, because of no one knows Cordina. You go to his box rack and you see it, you're going to be like, man, he just lost. He coming off a loss. And he's not even of this weight class. What's the point? So I literally don't understand what they're doing with certain people's careers over there. Like, it's just weird. Boxing needs compelling storylines. Like, for example, and see, I'm about to really rant because we unpacked. I really want to rant. I could go on for an hour with this. This is one of the major problems with boxing: lack of storyline in 2024. Lack of storyline. Some divisions aren't the most packed, so a way around that is compelling storylines, sequels, rematches, and trilogies. But if you avoid the rematch and the trilogy, or you're putting a fighter in with all opposition that is one-sided, that it never really warrants a rematch or a trilogy, then it's just like a bunch of one-offs. For example, Wilder and Fury, what happened in the first fight was so compelling that it warranted a second and third fight, and they gave us a classic trilogy. Or Ward Gotti, or Sugar Ray Leonard and Roberto Duran, for example. There's a ton of fights where you can tell right off the bat Shakur Stevenson versus Joe Cordina is not gonna warrant a trilogy, more than likely. I do believe that. And again, it's a lack of storyline. There's no real storyline there. Shakur is saying him and Tank are the best, but instead of fighting someone closer to Tank's competition, you're talking about fighting a guy that no one knows in America, to the point where the fight will absolutely bomb in America if they try to do it. But I think I'm gonna give them the benefit of the doubt and say the organizers are sensible enough to know that, so they're not gonna dare put this anywhere in America. They would take it to the UK or Saudi or somewhere else. You know what I mean? And then Shakur is gonna be like, oh, I always wanted to fight in the UK. This is amazing. And he's gonna be fighting at 3 p.m. my time, Pacific Standard Time. And I just don't see what that does for his career at all. especially coming off his last 2 performances that have been marked with criticism. Shakur at lightweight is not getting it done. And then finally, as I've said a little bit throughout this video, don't tell me anything about Shakur and Tank. I didn't even want to see the fight like that, but the way it's being moved, I care even less, because can you really even say Shakur deserves a fight with Tank? Like, really? He's not doing no crazy numbers. Like, he's not a brand like Ryan Garcia where they're going to guarantee do over 1 million buys, because Ryan has a strong fan base. Tank has a strong fan base. You married the two. They have a partnership. It does over 1 million. We don't even know what the numbers will be. We don't, because Tank would have to carry this promotion. It's just what it is. And then furthermore, you don't have any like scintillating, spicy highlight reel performances or wins from Shakur in this division. So, you know, based off Shakur's past and being an Olympian and stuff, maybe you generate some interest. But I really don't think the Tank and Shakur Stevenson fight is as big as people think, and it's not as deserving as people think. Because why is it fair that Tank is fighting Frank Martin, a known ranked guy here in the States where Tank fights, and Frank is looked in shape on the day of the weigh-in? He looked bigger. He was a southpaw, explosive, cerebral. He's a thinker. And then Shakur get to fight Cordina, coming off a loss and coming up in weight, right? And then Shakur just advances to a Tank fight, but Tank's fighting Ryan Garcia. He's fighting Pitbull Cruz. So he's fighting all these far more dangerous lightweight options. Even has a fight at 40 with Mario Barrios, who's now a champion in a higher weight class. Didn't get knocked out by Keith Thurman, while Shakur Stevenson gets to fight Yoshino and Cordina. Stop it.